Hello, I'm Sarah Mitchell, and this is a story I never thought I'd be telling publicly. But here we are. My name might not mean much to you right now, but by the end of this, you'll understand why I'm sharing something so deeply personal with strangers. Because sometimes the people closest to us need to hear from someone who's already walked this path. My son looked me in the eye on a Tuesday morning in November and said, "There's no space for old people like you, Mom." No chair. No apology. No soften the blow. Just an empty seat where I was supposed to belong at the table I had prepared, the food I had bought, the table settings I had arranged. I didn't argue. I didn't cry in that moment. I picked up my coat, smoothed down my cardigan, the navy one from Nordstrom that was a Christmas gift from my daughter-in-law years ago when she still called me Mom, and I left quietly through the kitchen door. 3 days later, everything they depended on quietly disappeared. Not with drama. Not with anger. Just with the precision of someone who finally understood what needed to happen. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to know who I was before that moment, because understanding the before is the only way you'll understand what happened next. For decades, I was the reliable one. The babysitter. The emergency fund. The quiet helper behind the scenes who never asked for recognition, but somehow became invisible anyway. I paid when things went wrong. I stayed silent when I was dismissed. I showed up at 6 a.m. for school pickups. I sat in waiting rooms at Mayo Clinic when my grandchildren had ear infections. I brought casseroles to church functions. I smiled through every family dinner, even when I wasn't included in the conversation. And slowly, without anyone noticing, or perhaps they noticed and didn't care, I stopped being family and became infrastructure. I became the thing you use when you need something and ignore when you don't. When people stop seeing you, they also stop remembering why they needed you in the first place. That's the part that gets dangerous. Thanksgiving morning that year came with an unusual cold snap across Minnesota. The thermometer outside my kitchen window read 32 degrees, and I remember thinking it matched the feeling that had been growing inside me for months. I arrived at my son's house in Edina early, as I always did. I had the key. I had the code. I had earned the right to arrive before everyone else through 15 years of showing up before anyone asked. I noticed something immediately when I walked through the garage. There were plates for everyone. Fine china. The good silverware that my mother had left me and I'd given to my son when he got married. Crystal glasses arranged with precision. Except there was nothing at my place. No plate. No napkin. No place card with my name written in my daughter-in-law Jennifer's careful handwriting. When I asked about it, my son Daniel didn't hesitate. He didn't fumble for an excuse. He just looked at me with this expression that I can only describe as resolved. "Mom, it's crowded. You understand." And then he said it. The words that changed everything. "There's no space for old people like you. We're trying to keep things young and vibrant. You get that, right?" I was 67 years old. I was wearing a dress I'd purchased specifically for this dinner. I had stayed up the night before preparing 4 dishes, a green bean casserole, homemade dinner rolls, a pecan pie that took 3 hours, and a vegetable tray with ranch dip from Hidden Valley that I'd made fresh that morning. I nodded slowly. I thanked him for his honesty. Those were the actual words I used. "Thank you for your honesty." And then I left before the turkey was even carved, before dessert was mentioned, before anyone could see me cry in a way that would give them the satisfaction of knowing they'd hurt me. That night, I didn't feel angry. Anger is hot and consuming, and it burns you up from the inside. What I felt was clear. Crystal clear. Like someone had turned on a light in a room I'd been fumbling around in for years. And clarity, I learned, is far more dangerous than anger. This wasn't about punishment. Let me be absolutely clear about that, because if I don't establish this now, you'll think I'm a villain in my own story. This was alignment. This was me finally doing something I should have done years ago. This was a woman in her late 60s realizing that she had been training her family to take her for granted, and that the only way to break that pattern was to stop participating in it entirely. My daughter-in-law, Jennifer, had married into money. Her family owned 3 dental practices across the Twin Cities area, and they had wealth that went back 3 generations. My son, Daniel, worked as a financial advisor, but let's be honest, his lifestyle was funded primarily by his wife's family connections and her trust fund. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's important context. They lived in a 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom home in Edina. They drove a Range Rover and a Tesla. They took vacations to Cabo every winter. Their children attended Wayzata High School, one of the most expensive private school systems in Minnesota. And for the last 15 years, I had been helping pay for it, unknowingly becoming the safety net they didn't even know they were leaning on. The financial entanglement between us was something I had never fully disclosed to my other children. There was a trust that my father had left me, nothing enormous, but substantial enough. $430,000 that had been sitting in a diversified portfolio, making modest returns year after year. I had willed half of it to Daniel. The other half was split between my daughter Rebecca and my youngest son Michael. I had also purchased an investment property in South Minneapolis in 2008, right before the housing crisis. I bought it for $92,000, paid cash, and had been renting it out ever since. The property had appreciated significantly. It was now worth just over $400,000. I had intended for Daniel to inherit that property as well. Additionally, I had established a college fund for my 3 grandchildren, Daniel and Jennifer's 2 kids, plus Rebecca's daughter. I contributed $5,000 every single year, without fail. This was something Jennifer knew about because she had thanked me on my birthday once, mentioning how grateful she was for my modest contributions. Modest. That word stuck with me. That night after I left that Thanksgiving dinner, I sat at my kitchen table in my modest 3-bedroom home in St. Paul, the one that I had paid off completely at age 53, and I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I got clear about numbers. I got clear about who owed what to whom. And I got clear about what needed to change. That night, I called my financial advisor. His name was Robert Chen, and he worked out of an office in downtown Minneapolis. I had been his client for 18 years. He knew my full situation. I told him that I wanted to make 3 moves, and I needed them processed within the week. First, I wanted to close the trust account. Not liquidate it. That would have tax implications that would have hurt me more than anyone else. I wanted to change the beneficiary designations. I named a charity that worked with elderly women in financial crisis as the primary beneficiary. Robert didn't ask questions. He was a professional, and he understood that these decisions were about life and death sometimes, not literal death but the death of old patterns. Second, I wanted to reassign the property deed. The house in South Minneapolis that had appreciated so significantly, the one I had kept in perfect condition, the one I had maintained through harsh Minnesota winters and humid summers, I transferred it into a charitable trust. Not completely away from my children, but into a structure that meant they would never directly inherit it. When I died, it would be liquidated and the proceeds would go to an organization that provided housing assistance to single mothers. Robert nodded when I told him this. He didn't try to talk me out of it. He had seen this before, I think. He had seen the moment when someone decided to take their power back. Finally, I redirected the college fund. Every single year, I had set up an automatic transfer of $5,000 to that account. I changed it. I canceled the standing instruction with the bank. Not out of spite toward my grandchildren, because I want to be clear about this too, but because I realized something important in that quiet moment at my kitchen table. My son and his wife were worth approximately $7 million. Combined. Their home alone was worth $2.3 million. Jennifer's trust fund had just been refreshed with a distribution from her grandmother's estate. They didn't need my $5,000. They never needed it. But they had trained themselves, and they had trained my grandchildren to expect it, to depend on it, to take it for granted. That's not love. That's conditioning. And I was breaking the cycle. When I finished making these calls, it was nearly midnight. I sat in the darkness of my living room. I didn't turn on any lights because I wanted to sit with what I had just done, and I waited for the panic to hit me. The regret. The second-guessing. The maternal guilt that had been wired into me since the day Daniel was born. But it never came. Instead, what came was peace. What came was the quiet certainty that I had finally told the truth with my actions, even if I couldn't speak the words. At that point, I could have stopped. I almost did. I spent the next 2 days in a state of strange calm. I painted my guest bedroom. I called my sister Carol in Des Moines, and we talked for 2 hours. I meal prepped chicken breast and brown rice in glass containers from Target, the good ones, the OXO brand that lasted forever. I did normal things while everything behind the scenes was quietly rearranging itself. Then my phone rang. It was Daniel. He didn't call to apologize. He called because something wasn't adding up in his financial planning software. His advisor, a different Robert Hammond from Wells Fargo, had flagged some adjustments that were affecting his projected inheritance. Daniel sounded confused on the phone. Not angry. Not apologetic. Confused, the way someone sounds when they realize the ground beneath them has shifted. He asked what happened. His exact words were, "Mom, what's going on with the trust?" And that's when I told him the truth. I didn't yell. I didn't make it dramatic. I just told him very calmly, very clearly, with no anger in my voice, exactly what I had done and why. When you told me there was no room for me at that table, I said, I believed you. So I stopped taking up space in your life. All the space. Not just at Thanksgiving. All of it. He tried to argue. He said I was being emotional. He said I was punishing his children for something their parents had done. He said this was below me. And I responded with something I had been thinking about since that moment at the kitchen table. Below me. I said, Daniel, I have been below myself for 15 years. I taught you that it was okay to ignore your mother as long as you were taking care of yourself. I taught you that respect is optional. I taught you that love is something you can edit and revise based on convenience. I was wrong to teach you that, but I'm teaching you something different now. He didn't argue after that. Because deep down, in that place where we all know the truth whether we want to admit it or not, he understood. Understanding isn't the same as agreement, but it's the foundation that agreements are built on. What happened next surprised me, though in hindsight it shouldn't have. Within 48 hours, Jennifer called. She was angry in a way that Daniel hadn't been. She said things like, "You'll regret this," and "You're going to die alone, and we'll never forgive you." These are things people say when they're realizing that the leverage they had is gone. I listened to her. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. When she finished, I said, Jennifer, I hope that's not true. But more importantly, I hope you understand that what you're feeling right now is what I felt at that table. That sense of not being wanted. That sense of being erased. That's been my entire life for the last 15 years, and now it's your turn to sit with it. I suggest you do that work. I suggest you ask yourself why it took losing a financial benefit to make you realize how you've been treating me. She hung up on me after that. I expected I might not hear from her again for a while. I was right. Then came the hardest part. My daughter Rebecca called. She wasn't angry. She was disappointed. She said, Mom, I understand what you're trying to do, but did you have to hurt Daniel's kids to do it? This question required a real answer, not a defensive one. So I gave her one. Rebecca, I said, I didn't hurt them. Daniel and Jennifer have more than enough money to give them excellent educations. What I did was stop subsidizing a family who told me I wasn't worth being at their table. The children will be fine. What won't be fine is if they grow up thinking this is how you treat people. So, actually, I did them a favor. Rebecca was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I think you're right. I'm glad you did this. And that meant something. That meant something in a way that nothing else had in months. The next few weeks were strange. People in my life who knew Daniel and Jennifer started reaching out. Not to check on me, mostly, but to ask what had happened because word travels in tight-knit Minnesota communities. I became, for a moment, the scandal, the difficult mother, the ungrateful parent, the woman who was acting out of spite. These narratives don't bother me as much as they might have before, because I finally understood something that should have been obvious all along. When you set a boundary with people who benefit from your boundlessness, they will call it punishment. They will call it cruelty. They will call it any number of things before they will call it what it actually is, self-respect. I returned to my normal life. I went to my book club, we were reading a mystery novel by Tana French, and I didn't mention any of this. I went to my yoga classes on Tuesday and Thursday mornings at the community center in St. Paul. I helped Rebecca with her business. She owned a small marketing firm, and she was working on a campaign for a tech company called Surge Analytics, and I would review her copy and offer feedback. I got vaccinated for shingles at my doctor's office. I went to the grocery store at Lunds and Byerly's and bought things like turmeric and fresh ginger because I had read an article about anti-inflammatory foods. I lived my life, and I noticed something interesting. I wasn't angry anymore. I was lighter. I was clearer. I was sleeping better than I had in years. There's something about telling the truth, even when it's expensive, that settles something in your chest. 3 months later, Daniel called again. This time his tone was different. He said, "Mom, I want to try something. I want to have a conversation with you. Not to convince you to change your mind, just to talk." I said yes. We met at a restaurant called The Craftsman on West 7th in St. Paul. It was a Thursday evening in February. The weather had started to shift slightly. Spring was still months away, but the darkness wasn't quite as absolute anymore. We sat at a corner table, and for the first time in years, Daniel really looked at me. Not through me, at me. He said, "I want to apologize." And I said, "I'm listening." He talked for a long time. He talked about how he had been so focused on building a certain image, successful, young, vibrant, the things he'd thrown in my face, that he had stopped seeing the people who were actually supporting him. He talked about how he realized after everything happened that I had been doing things for him that he had never even noticed. He said that his financial advisor had walked him through the numbers, and when he realized how much I had been contributing, he felt sick. Not angry at me. Sick at himself. He said, "I took you for granted, Mom. I completely took you for granted, and I don't know how to fix that." I could have said a lot of things in that moment. I could have made him feel worse. I could have lectured him about respect or gratitude or the proper treatment of mothers. Instead, I said something simple. You're going to look at your children differently now. You're going to see how they take things for granted, and it's going to make you uncomfortable. And that discomfort is the beginning of change. We didn't resolve everything that night. We didn't reestablish the trust accounts or reverse the financial decisions I had made. But something shifted. Something started to repair itself. It wasn't instant. It took months. But Daniel started coming to Sunday dinners again. Not with his wife and kids. Just him. And we would sit at my table, the same table where I had set a place for everyone but myself at Thanksgiving, and we would talk like two adults who actually respected each other. Eventually, Jennifer came too, but that's a different story. The point is that there was movement. There was change. What I learned from this entire experience, the thing that I think is important for anyone watching right now, is that some parents teach their children how to inherit money. I chose to teach something else. I taught them that respect isn't automatic. I taught them that access isn't permanent. I taught them that love that only exists when it's convenient isn't actually love at all. I taught them that there are consequences to the way you treat people, even when those people are family. Especially when those people are family. I don't know if I'll ever be completely welcomed back into the fold the way I was before. But for the first time in years, my absence spoke louder than my presence. My absence said something that my presence never could. And that changed everything. When you finally stand up for yourself, you don't do it for the people who hurt you. You do it for yourself. You do it for the person you're going to be in the next chapter. You do it for the future version of yourself who will thank you for having boundaries. And now, let me add this because I believe it matters. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe to Olive Revenge Stories, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. These are the stories of women who finally said enough. These are the stories of people who chose themselves when the world told them to keep choosing everyone else. When you subscribe, you're not just supporting a channel. You're supporting a narrative that says dignity matters. You're supporting a story that says boundaries are love. You're supporting the idea that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away. So please subscribe. Share this. Comment below and tell me, Have you ever had to set a boundary that cost you something? Have you ever had to choose yourself when it meant losing someone else? Because that's what this is really about. It's about the quiet revolution of people who finally decided they mattered. Now, let's continue with more stories just like this one.